Everyone. Once upon a time, there was a man who had been stranded on a desert island for 10 years. Finally, rescuers came and rescued him. But they looked around and they had one question to ask him. If you've been here all this time, all alone, how come there are 3 huts on this island? And the man said, well, the first hut is my home. And the second hut is my church. And the third hut is the church I used to go to. I think we can all relate to that, can't we? So let's start with a question. In your life, when did you first begin searching for the truth? And how did you end up at a Unity church? Whatever it was that got you here, it probably was a life-defining moment. Dr. H. Emily Cady, in the 11th chapter of the book, has this to say: perhaps it's not too much to say that the majority of people first turn to God because of some weakness, some failure, some almost unbearable want in their lives. And after vainly having tried all the other ways to overcome them or satisfy them, they turn in desperation to God. She goes on to say that there is in the heart of all people an instinctive feeling that somewhere there is a power, the power that is able to give us exactly what we want. And within us we have this instinctive feeling that if we can only connect with that power, which is our conception of God, we could prevail on it to give us all the things we want. Dr. Cady emphasizes that feeling is itself God-given. It is the divine self suggesting to us the true remedy for life. Everyone wants to be free. Free as the birds of the air. Free from sickness. Free from bondage. Free from poverty. Free from all forms of limitation. And we have a right to be. Dr. Cady says it's our right to have that desire. It's a God-given right to be free. Free from all those things. So what does all this actually have to do with spiritual gifts? A lot, really, a lot. And I want to give you a little bit of background information about the main reason that Dr. Cady wrote this chapter on spiritual gifts. First of all, at the time when the chapter was written, physical healing was just about the whole reason for this new religious metaphysical thought movement. Healing, physical healing. With the work of Phineas Quimby, Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, the early stages of Unity with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, all seemed to be exclusively concerned with one thing: healing. Now, they had spectacular success with these healings. Had they not, these movements would probably have just withered on the vine, and we wouldn't be hearing about them at all today. But because of their great success with healing, each of these movements flourished and became famous all over North America. Now, we do remember that the Unity movement itself began with the physical healing of Myrtle Fillmore using spiritual practices. But Charles and Myrtle were very quick to realize something. As wonderful as that healing was and is, it shouldn't be the only exclusive reason for a religious movement. Worship of God, understanding of truth, these were to be the main purposes of Unity. Therefore, Charles and Myrtle did something that was to change the course of the movement entirely. They made the decision to classify healing as only one of the purposes for the development of spiritual consciousness. Healing was to take its place among all the other fruits of the Spirit, such as illumination, guidance, peace of mind, prosperity, harmonious relationships, freedom, love, forgiveness, all these things. healing was to be one of those things, not the only one. The Fillmores were very fortunate to attract someone like Dr. H. Emily Cady. Besides being a physician, she was a unique spiritual thinker. And she agreed entirely with the Fillmores that they had to branch out beyond just physical healing. The movement had to recognize and develop all the proponents of our spiritual potential. So it was to help students do this and work on this that Dr. Cady came up with a lesson in the book on spiritual gifts. Depending on how you look at it, it was either very fortunate or very unfortunate that she wrote this chapter before Charles Fillmore had the illumination about the 12 powers. She wrote, it was quite a bit before. 12 Powers didn't come out until 1930, long after Lessons in Truth was written. Everyone believes that if Lessons in Truth had been, the 12 Powers had been written by then, she would have used that as the basis for her chapter, but it wasn't written. So instead, she turned to existing material as the basis for her thesis on spiritual gifts. She turned to the discourse by Paul, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Use this as the spiritual basis. The whole chapter of 1 Corinthians talks about various spiritual gifts given to individuals by the Holy Spirit and the importance of every spiritual gift. I counted them out, and I think Paul came up with 19 spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians and also in Romans. But he wanted everyone to know that no specific spiritual gift is more important or necessary than the other. For instance, one person might have the gift of healing, a wonderful gift of healing. Another person might have the gift of helping. Paul says helping is just as important and needed as healing. All the gifts are equally important. One gift that we don't hear much about anymore, or certainly we don't hear much about in unity, is the spiritual gift of speaking in tongues. Do we? But it is not unheard of. I personally knew and admired a unity minister, Reverend Joseph Wolpert, who was an evangelical unity minister. And one time, many, many years ago, we had him come and give a healing service at a workshop here at Unity Community. And he laid his hands on me, he prayed over me, speaking in tongues, and healed a broken toe that I had. It was quite amazing because I did not ask him for healing. But when I went home that night, I was healed. So he was one. Now I happen to know that there were two. There was a very early unity writer and teacher, Marcus Bach, and he wrote this book about speaking in tongues. As soon as I heard about this, I went straight away to Amazon and ordered it for me. He tells all about his experience, a beautiful experience of speaking in tongues. I've put this in the library so you can read it. Anybody wants to, bring it back so other people can enjoy it. But we just never ever hear of any unity people anymore speaking in tongues. Not to say it won't happen, but we don't hear about it. We should understand that all the spiritual gifts of God are, first of all, divine ideas. Divine ideas. And Charles Fillmore, in writing the 12 Powers, picked out what he thought were the most important of the divine ideas and used these as our spiritual faculties that we're familiar with. Unity people are familiar with. You have a handout. Faith, strength, judgment, love, power, imagination, understanding, will, order, zeal, elimination, and life. He says these are the 12 most important spiritual powers. They're no longer just divine ideas in the mind of God. They have evolved into more than that where we're concerned. All people have all of these spiritual gifts, whether they know it or not. All people have access to these spiritual gifts, whether they've made the effort to learn about them and express them or not. We all have them. One of the great things that I learned from this chapter of Lessons in Truth that you might not know is that a realization of our spiritual gifts does a wonderful thing for a person. It's called transmutation or transformation. You know what it is? You're going to know in a minute, it's okay. This is the power of Spirit working for us to transform misfortune into a new blessing, or into the birth of a new blessing. It works especially, Dr. Katie says, in two common occurrences all of us experience from time to time: disappointment and failure. Now, a person who has no awareness of their spiritual gifts, or not operating on a very high spiritual consciousness, when they have the experience called disappointment and failure, they hate it. They just see it as disappointment is disappointment, failure is failure. They hate it and they resent it. It's hard to imagine feeling any different, isn't it, when those things happen to you? But to a person who has awakened to his or her spiritual gifts, the situation changes. It's transmuted. It's transformed. You get a change of attitude. And it all begins when we begin to awaken to our higher spiritual levels. On these higher levels of consciousness, we become aware that we have certain spiritual resources that we perhaps were not aware of before. As soon as a person acknowledges that these gifts are present within him or her, a wonderful thing begins to happen. I want all of us to acknowledge these gifts today. We sense their presence within us. We begin to feel their presence in our physical body. They are there. They are energy centers. It's good if we can learn them by name, call them by name, expect good things from them. We can have a revolutionary change of perspective towards many things in life by using our spiritual powers, and especially toward those hardships that we all experience called disappointment and failure. Dr. Katie makes a statement, it really sounds like nonsense to anyone who is not awakened to their spiritual gifts. She says, "Do not fear failure, but call failure good, because it really is." Right. Call failure good, because it really is. And now we could say, how can she say that? How can she possibly say that? What can she mean by that? Well, see, the answer is she was so far advanced spiritually that she realized the truth of the matter. Those things that we call disappointment and failure don't have to be. And she demonstrated in her own life the miracle working power that can result from calling things good instead of continuing to call them bad. It's a bad experience. I failed at that. No, it was good. It was good. When she learned this for herself, she gave a suggestion to her students or her readers to do an experiment. Try it. Just try it. Something bad happens in your life that you think is bad, that you think is a failure or a disappointment. Call it good and see what happens. Her students did that. Many of them did it. They followed it, and they found out that it worked, and they got wonderful results. Most of the time, what we call failure isn't failure at all anyway. It's simply the experience didn't work out the way we wanted it to work out, right? Not failure. It's just disappointment. And under spiritual law, all genuine effort will eventually be rewarded with something good. It cannot fail. God is not mocked. And we make an effort to do something, we will be rewarded for it. So that so-called failure will turn out to be the planting of a seed for some future success. Dr. Katie knew this. That's why she was just very confident saying, "Do not fear failure, call failure good, for it really is." Now, I personally have not tried that this week, but I want us to try it. Same principle holds true with disappointment. And look for the good. If you're disappointing, something happens, there is good there, and look for the good there. You'll find it. And you will get a blessing that will more than make up for that disappointment that you experienced. So we have these 12 spiritual gifts, and we need to learn what they are. We need to call on them. We need to know they're there to help us grow, to help us in our everyday life. So how should they be used? How should they be used? The primary purpose, although a lot of people would not agree with this, but the primary purpose is not to get more stuff, to get more things in the world, to accumulate more treasures, to have a bigger car. That's not the purpose. A lot of people think it is. The most important thing is to awaken spiritually, to grow in consciousness, and to follow the words of Jesus, the Master. He said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all those other things will be added to you without you having to worry about it so much. So using your spiritual gifts for spiritual reasons, you do that, and all the other things you want will be given unto you. I'm hoping that in the new year we can do another Sunday series of the 12 powers, which we did a few years ago. It was a lot of fun. And so for now, it's enough for you to be aware of them and to start thinking about them. I will tell you this, here at Unity Community, as long as I can remember, we have always strived to follow spiritual principles and seek divine guidance in all that we do, the leaders of this church. We've always done it. And over the years, whenever we've had a need, sooner or later, someone would walk in that door with exactly the talent that we needed for this church. Follow the spiritual principles. Ask for divine guidance. And then whatever it is that you're needing will come walking in your front door as well. The Apostle Paul, after talking about spiritual gifts in chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, follows it up with the most beautiful of his writings that you're familiar with, chapter 13. In chapter 13, he continues to talk about spiritual gifts, but he adds something new. If I speak with the languages of men and angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith enough to move all mountains, but don't have love, I'm nothing. If I dole out all my goods to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned, but don't have love, it profits me nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't envy. It doesn't brag. It's not proud. Love doesn't behave itself inappropriately. Doesn't seek its own way. Is not provoked. Takes no account of evil. Love doesn't rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never, never fails. Where there are prophecies, they'll be done away with. Where there are various languages, such as speaking in tongues, they will cease. Where there is knowledge, it will be done away with. But now, faith, hope, and love remain these three. The greatest of these is love. So let us give thanks to God for the spiritual gifts that are given us. Let us learn about them and develop them, and let us use them lovingly in any way that we can to make this world a better place. God bless you.